Alleluia. Om Mani Padme Om. Allah Satnam.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and today we're speaking with Fr Bruce Duncan. He's a Redemptorist Priest and a lecturer at the Yarra Theological Union. Thanks for coming in, Fr Bruce.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited, very interested to talk about the Pope's encyclical.
Absolutely, a big subject, and we could be here for a long time. So before we go there, though, it's you're obviously born a Catholic, and how did you come through to becoming a priest? What was
with some difficulty. My father was a Presbyterian, so he wasn't too happy about this. But anyway, we got it sorted, and I felt that was the thing for me.
Yes.
I felt some sort of calling to that, and I've just continued on there on that course. And over time, I belonged to Redemptorists. They asked me to get involved in the social justice work more professionally. Yes. So I went off to university and so on, and I've continued in that ever since. So when this encyclical came out, I said, "You beauty, that's just what we want to hear."
Yeah, this is grist for the mill.
Yes.
Absolutely. Just before we go over that, just if you don't mind, just going back to that moment where you felt a calling to go down the Catholic path, was there a key seed in there? Was there something specific which did that? Or series of issues?
It took a long process. I resisted the idea of becoming a priest for a long time. I didn't know whether I had the capability, and I didn't know whether, what would happen. But I thought, oh, well, give it a go. It doesn't work out, move on to something else.
Yes.
And so we just kept, but, I look back now and I think, thank God I did.
Yes, absolutely. It was obviously the right choice.
Yes.
But it would have been a difficult one at the time, no doubt.
At the time it was, yes.
Yes, absolutely. The Pope and the encyclical, a huge meaty topic. But before we do that, you've written some articles on in the Catholic Australasian Record on the Pope and his background. Would you mind just giving a bit of a story, because it's important to understand who this man is,
yes,
and
yes.
what it is that drives him to have written this?
No, that's excellent question. And when he was elected, I thought, well, who was this fellow? I've never really heard of him, and I thought, I'm a bit worried that he mightn't have the ability to handle all the different issues that we're faced with.
Yes.
But I've been very comforted as he's gone along. And I think what I hadn't understood, and we didn't in this country, was he has a fabulous background for this role, actually, because he's been a key figure in the Latin American church for quite a long time. He was organised the big Conference of Latin American Bishops in 2007 in Aparecida in Brazil. And at that conference, which was a stunning conference, it really wrestled with all the big social issues that Brazil is facing at the moment, with the hunger, the poverty, and this is just before the global financial crisis, mind you.
Yes.
The role of international companies, the financial crises various countries were in, the international financial system. So all these issues, poverty, hunger and all the rest, were already very much on his agenda. And at that conference, he supervised the writing of the final document. And reading this was an amazing thing for me, because I thought it is very much in his style. It's a 160-page document, a very full treatment of the whole situation, the church response in Latin America to this. And I thought, reading his later encyclicals and documents, I can see that he's continued on in that. So if you've read the Aparecida documents, you'll immediately recognise where all this social activism is coming from him.
Right. Yes. So it's not just some allow him the Pope, I better do something. This is the vein of his awareness.
And he's not an academic in approaching this. I mean, he's very well read, he's very well informed, very well connected in various places. But he's not an academic, and he says two things he's learnt in his life: speak simply and use symbols. And that's what he does, very spontaneously. Very well, yeah. But he's thought through all these issues over his life. He's not coming to them new. And I was wondering, sometimes he gives these off-the-cuff news interviews and things, and I was wondering, how is it that he's so confident that he can do this without checking it out with anybody? But reading his stuff and knowing more of his history, you realise he has sorted out. Particularly, he prays a lot. He's up at 4 o'clock in the morning, prays, meditates for 2 hours before he starts the day. And he's done that for a long time. So he has worked through these things in a very prayerful way. So it's a religious context he puts it all into, not a political or a social. I mean, that all belongs, but a part of the religious picture. Right. And I think what undergirds his whole approach is, what is God interested in? Human well-being. And in this encyclical, he's saying to the whole world, let's look at this crisis we're facing at the moment, and let's get together and work out what we can do about it.
Yes, he makes the point that when he's talking about the human being, he's talking about all human beings.
Yes,
and he makes the point, I think, not just Catholics. So did he actually say that literally? He does in one place, doesn't he?
He says that, and he does it with his actions. Like at the launch of his document, they had an Orthodox metropolitan from a place in Italy, but he was representing the head of the Orthodox Church in Istanbul. So this is, and he quoted him because they had, in a sense, produced a document much earlier on, which he's drawing on for this encyclical. So he's reaching out to different Christian groups and trying to be inclusive as he possibly can.
And you mentioned, we were talking earlier, that the Muslim clerics have put something out as well.
Yes, just last week there was a big conference in Istanbul, the Muslim conference on the international climate crisis, and they put out a very similar document. There were messages to and fro with Cardinal Turkson, who helped draft this document. He's the president of the Justice and Peace Commission in Rome. And then the conference replied to Turkson as well.
Yes, and that's good that you take a break there, because we're out of time. We'll be back in a moment. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and today we're speaking with Fr Bruce Duncan. He's a lecturer at the Yarra Theological Union, and we were just talking about Pope Francis, and you mentioned his simplicity. One of the things which is notable at the moment, and you see a lot of commentary about it, is the fact that he abandons a lot of the regalia, including the red shoes, etc. That's not new, though, is it?
It's not new for him,
no,
certainly, and he's throughout his life, he's particularly in recent decades, he's been very close to the people living in the slums. He often spend time down there with them, get to know them, walk around, say hello, pray with them, and and so on. So that's one of his big conversion moments, I think. He's come out of a background. Look at Argentina. You know, they've just been through the dirty war.
Yes.
The campaign of intimidation and torture under the military regime was terrible.
Yes.
Many of his friends were killed. 150 priests were murdered.
Yes, of course.
Many nuns and lay people as well. So, you know, it wasn't just a secular thing. It was aimed at... So, and he was ferrying and secreting people out of the country at various times.
Oh, okay.
Including one of his great friends who happened to be a communist. But he said he learnt a lot from her. She was later killed by the regime because she came back in. They smuggled her daughter out. She came back in, and she was later killed.
Right.
So he talks about that as one of the great influences on his life.
Yes.
But he said what he learnt was to listen to the people, to get to know the people, and in his own self, I think he was always committed to the poor. But what happened was that with all this process, and particularly the collapse, financial collapse in Argentina in 2001, he realised that the problems are not just personal, or the one-to-one thing won't solve it. They're structural,
systematic.
And so his thinking then, he didn't abandon what he was doing with, face-to-face contact with the poor. He's very insistent on that. He's insistent on it for us priests and lay people as well. One of the things he says, when you give money to a beggar, do you really look him in the eyes? Do you make contact with him, or do you just throw him the coins and move on without making contact?
Yes.
So what he's saying is make real contact with the poor. Get to know them, not in a superficial way, but as a brother or a sister, and then do what you can. So those two things he insists on in this encyclical too. It all leads up to action.
Action, yes.
What are we going to do about this? And what he's saying is, don't leave it all to governments. Everybody needs to do something, and everybody can do something where they are. It may only be little, but it will be transformative for us in the process of doing it. And then if millions of people are doing that, acting to preserve the environment or improve the status of others in the community, then there'll be real change.
That's interesting. I don't mean to make it basically political, but I think Greenpeace had a theme which they operated from, maybe still do, is that think globally and act locally. That's basically what the point that Pope Francis is making, isn't it? To act locally in your immediate moment, and it goes wider. He's very analytical in his approach, and his background is as a Jesuit. What influence do you think that has on him?
Well, it's obviously very, very formative for him, and and I think particularly what he has is a process of discernment, the Jesuit discernment about how the movement of spirit is within each one and what is called to. That is taken very seriously among the Jesuits, and there's a very definite process of doing that, and I think that's very profound in him. What it has resulted in, though, is connected with an experience of his own crisis as a Jesuit and as a priest, and he talks about when he was moved to Cordoba in the north of Argentina as a time of great personal crisis for him.
Yes.
Because he realised he had been at work, he'd made mistakes. He talks about his mistakes, that he was very authoritarian.
Yes.
And he was never right-wing, he says, but very authoritarian in the way he treated the other community Jesuits, I presume, as provincial. So what he learned from that is to listen to people very carefully and not to rush in. And one of his key words is dialogue. Right. So in this encyclical, he has a whole chapter on what are we going to do about this crisis we're in now with the environment and all the other things. How do we deal with world poverty? And he says, first of all, we've got to talk to one another. We've got to talk internationally. We've got to really listen carefully, not just listen to the words, but listen to the heart of people.
That's right.
He's very strong on heart speaks to heart as people communication, not just ideas. He says the practicalities are more important than the ideas. Ideas are abstract, but what is real?
Now that's the heart-to-heart is a practical component as well, but that's also a mystical base. Do you give him a deep mystical base in the way he operates? Oh,
very definitely, and he, in appealing to Saint Francis, who has this mystical sense of God present in everything and every person, he also has some of that, and he's talking about this sense of God in nature and revealed in nature, not just in church stuff, but in the whole world. He's saying every people has a sense of that, and we should be more. We need to be more attuned and recover a sense of it. I have some ministry with the Aboriginal people, and this is very much along. They have this instinctively. They have it instinctively in Argentina as well, because of the indigenous populations there. So he's saying this is something we need to recover. and it's in everybody. So why can't we move together on this great demand of how do we rescue our planet and our civilization at this stage?
Oh, right.
But listen to one another, move together, and have a sense of this is a sacred duty on all of us, because the world is sacred to God.
That's very much got the ring of the indigenous connection with the land, etc. That's very encouraging. It's not encouraging that we're running out of time for this segment, so we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Fr Bruce Duncan. He's a lecturer at the Yarra Theological Union. Father, we had the situation of the encyclical having been mentioned quite a number of times in our discourse to this point. How did that come about? What are the roots of the encyclical?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me that, because there's been a lot of criticism of the encyclical. There's some people, the Australian has run a number of articles saying, it's ignorant about economics, and it's basically very poorly informed, and so on. Not at all. This encyclical has been based on years of work by top scientists. They have the Justice and Peace Commission in Rome, as it got some very top people advising it. You have the Pontifical Academy for Sciences, which has something like 35 Nobel Prize winners on it, among others.
Yes.
The Pontifical Commission for Social Sciences has a similar sort of array of luminati, really world experts. People like Joseph Stiglitz, one of the world's leading economists. Amartya Sen has been involved in this. Joseph Stiglitz met just recently with the Pope. Even some of the leading left-wing economists like Naomi Klein, who wrote that fabulous book, This Changes Everything, on the effect of the climate change, or the consequences of it.
Yes.
She's been involved in the consultations. She's been, the Pope has been in conversation with Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations. He's been to see him. They've had conversations with Obama, with Hollande, President of France.
Yes.
So a lot of the diplomatic work is going on about this encyclical, so it's been taken very seriously.
Yes,
and he's thinking very strategically about this, because it's placed just before the Paris meeting, and of course in September he's got the he's meeting with the United Nations. He's talked to the United Nations, and then meeting US Congress. So this is going to be very high on his agenda. It's going to be a very difficult thing for him, I think, but he's very resolute about what he has said is that he's learned from the reaction to the encyclical is that he must speak more to the middle class of people, not to try to. There's a perception that he's condemned capitalism. He hasn't. He's saying we want a capitalism with conscience, a capitalism for everybody, not just for the rich.
Good luck.
And what has happened is that 60 people in the world have more income than 3.5 billion of the poorest people in the world. And this is what he's very concerned about, because he comes from a developing country, understands the difficulty, and he can see the vast injustice and the inequality and the misery that this is causing. And he's saying it's quite unnecessary. We have the resources, but we're not using them properly. We've got to sort this out quickly, because the climate change is against us. We've got increasing population growth. How are we going to manage the future?
And anyone who's familiar with what Jesus has said over and over again would find that a pope or some other Christian cleric is well qualified to speak about those issues, about sharing, about living simply, because it's one of the basic tenets of the religion itself. How about mysticism? We mentioned this a little earlier, and you were talking about the first peoples, etc., who have a much more mystical connection with the earth in a general context. Do you think that could be a stumbling block for Pope Francis, in the sense that I detect that part of what he's communicating is actually coming from that engine?
Yeah, it definitely is, but he doesn't talk about it in those terms, of course. Mysticism would turn most people off. But what he's saying is, look around you. Appreciate what a gift all this world is, the people around you, the plants, the animals, the birds. Can you hear them singing? Can you hear the song of creation? And he's not talking about this as a Catholic thing. He's talking about this is something we all share in common. We all have this sense of the mystery, and what are we here for? You know, this is what we're thinking about. How can we be better human beings, and how can we live together with more integrity and more care for one another, with care for the environment? That's a subtitle for the encyclical.
Yes.
Caring for our home, this planet.
It's amazing, isn't it, really? And maybe you can illuminate why the name Francis was chosen, because the parallel between him and St. Francis of Assisi and that awareness is just so powerful. How does the name come about? How come he was called Francis?
He talks about it in terms of, when he knew he was going to be elected, and his friend Cardinal Humes said to him, remember the poor, just whispered to him as they were doing the final count. And he immediately came into his mind St. Francis. And the concern for the poor, because of his own background and extensive experience, and also the concern for peace. So he put those things together, and he said, that's it. I'll call myself Pope Francis.
Because, well, and of course the celebrated picture and statuary that you see of St. Francis with the birds sitting all over him. Because, I guess whether that's a myth or otherwise, but he had that really close connection with the environment and seeing the divine essence in all around him.
Yes.
That's quite remarkable. So that's part of this. The encyclical grows out directly from this awareness of environment and wholeness and centeredness of being. Is that where that's the real seed of it, do you think?
It is part of it, but I think he's desperately concerned about the environmental issues and saying, look, this is happening whether we like it or not. We can put our head in the sand and pretend it's not happening, but we've got to deal with it. We've got to deal with it quickly.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, well, something else we have to deal with quickly is the fact that we've finished for today. And look, this is such a fantastic topic. Would you come back and talk about it next week?
Sure, I'd be delighted to.
Yeah, let's do that. Father Bruce, thank you very much. You've been watching Harmony and Diversity. Next week, we'll be back speaking with Father Bruce Duncan again about the encyclical. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allahu